Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and I am incredibly excited about the state of competitive Warcry right now. I think that the top warbands are really awesome. And so, one thing that is inevitable about every single game is that people are bound to complain a little bit about the very top tier of the game. You get kind of beat up by something, and there's always something that's on people's mind to complain about. But the problem with that is that something that is maybe less easy to see or less easy to fixate on, but is, I think, a more powerful force, is just awesome games. And the top Warcry factions right now are producing really awesome games that I think we should be really excited about. And I want to talk about because I would love for these to stick around and be the core of the game for a little while because they're amazing. And I just want to put this out almost as a PSA for people to try them out, try out strategies that are good against them and hope to run into them, things like that, because it's really cool. I think right now when you look at the top of the metagame, this was the top two tiers from my last tier list I did. This was a while ago now, actually. This came out, I believe, in October, probably due to make a new one soonish. I would only make a few changes, though. I think I would drop Monster Killers out of A tier, not very far, just into like the highest B tier. And I don't know if Cruel Boys are supposed to be at the bottom of S or at the top of A. I'd add 3 or 4 factions to A tier. I think A tier is a lot bigger than what I've represented here, but for the most part, this is pretty similar to what I would do right now. And the top of the game right now has such a cool array of different playstyles. Being able to smash your opponent off the board is still king when you look at what's doing well in a lot of tournaments. A lot of the things that are really, really good that aren't that are just not as popular. I think right now you can really justify playing 7 models or 15 models or anything in between. And so a lot of people see that and go with 7 or 8 because that's more fun because you get a lot more of your cool smashy pieces, and that's cool and that's great for them. It's awesome that they can do that. So you can smash, you can swarm, you can play these like fancy ability soup lists with lots of specialists now that you really couldn't throughout certain points of Warcry's existence. So it's really cool. You can do shooting lists, you can do melee lists, you can do combo lists, you can do control lists, and all of them are viable right now, which is so amazing. I don't think there's been a period of time when so many different types of playstyles were something that you could credibly bring to a tournament and feel like you're giving yourself a chance in every single game, which is awesome. I think that people should be incredibly excited about that. So, that said, there's still a lot of temptation always in every single collectible strategy game to complain about the top stuff. And so I'm going to go through what I think are some of the top archetypes out there and why they're awesome and why, even if they do need some adjustments, because let's face it, the strongest things in the game are stronger than the other things. Even if they need some adjustments, those adjustments should be very, very small. Let's start with Skaven. It's the one on everyone's mind. I remember maybe I might be partially to blame for kind of some people's panic about Skaven. In my last meta video, tried to be very, very clear that I think that they're the best faction in the game. I think they are still the best faction in the game, but I don't think the gap is very big. They are probably one of the weakest, best things that we've had, if that makes sense. And I think it's really cool that they're good because I think they're really fun to play against. I've only played against them twice now in a competitive, like good lists against good lists setting. But I played with them a few times. So maybe since I've played more with them and taken second in a pretty high level tournament with them, that maybe I'm not the person to listen to about why they're so cool. But I do think they're cool. I think they're fun to play against because they create this kind of opposite day play style. For when you play against them. And maybe that's why it's being difficult for some folks to kind of adjust to them. Normally, a formula that's served a lot of folks well in Warcry is getting into the chaff clearing race where your big guys just go attack their little guys and try to take out their little guys as quick as possible. And hopefully you kill their little guys faster than they can kill your little guys. And That's been a formula for a ton of successful lists throughout the game's history. You can't do that against Skaven. Your their little guys come back and they don't even have to spend dice on them. Their big guys have a harder time when they have damage on them. That's another thing that's been kind of a rule about Warcry that is completely flipped against Skaven, which is so cool, I think, where normally if you put a bunch of damage into your opponent's biggest, scariest thing and you don't kill it, that's a disaster. One of the best one of the best ways to lose a game is deal 15 damage to something big and scary, because that's just wasted damage, right? But against Skaven, you actually do kind of want to put some damage into the Rat Ogres, even if you're not going to kill them, because the Rat Ogres, one of their best abilities involves doubling the amount of damage that they've taken. And so if you can put that ability out of reach for them, that's actually quite valuable. So it's a little bit like they do have a bracket to them, which makes them really engaging and interesting to play against them. It also means that there are real answers to Skaven. You can either shoot them quickly before they get to you, like if you go first or if you have some good screens that make it hard for them to get to you, you can shoot them. That's also true on like very spread out boards where there's a lot of different places that the opponent has to go. Sometimes it can be hard for them to get to your shooters while also playing the mission, things like that. You can also just go over the top or just out efficient the Rat Ogres. Things like Annihilator Primes are really good against them, where they just kind of have better dice propositions, like in terms of higher toughness, higher strength than the Rat Ogres do. Things like big ogre leaders can have a really good matchup against the Rat Ogres because they can take a couple hits from a Rat Ogre and then kill it. So there are ways to take out Rat Ogres in melee. There are ways to take out Rat Ogres in shooting. It is really hard with chaff right now. They're incredibly efficient at clearing chaff off of the board, which is why you don't want to get in that race with Skaven. You kind of want to have your damage dealers take on their damage dealers head on. But you can still do it as long as you have the 13th wound on your chaff. The 13th wound is incredibly important as far as avoiding getting one-shot killed by a Rat Ogre. Rat Ogres are very good at killing dwarves, for example, which is sad because I really love dwarves. Especially like my honorary dwarves, my Stone Guard and Lumineth, my KO dwarves, which I've been really enjoying. Lots of dwarves in this game that I really love. Vulcan Flame Seekers, which is one of my favorite factions. Jade Obelisk, who I love, who are kind of honorary dwarves, all kinds of dwarves that I really like. Rat Ogres just blow them off the table, right? But if you've got that 13th wound, if you have a 16th wound, those can be really good at surviving Rat Ogre attacks. If you have like cheap things that have that many wounds, that can be good. So like a wound blessing on some good chaff can actually be pretty useful, things like that. So there are real answers to Skaven that, hopefully the community will adjust to. That is one thing that's kind of tough with war games compared to card games, I've noticed. In card games, the community will sort of adjust and take the 3 or 4 different card choices that change a matchup. In war games, half of the field is just never going to adjust to whatever the best thing is, which means that sometimes, even if there are real answers to the best things in the game, sometimes you end up having to make adjustments anyway because just the community refuses to, right? And that's fine because people play what they want and you should continue to play what you want. However, you should also consider playing some of the things or just like making the slight tweaks to your lists that can make you good against these things. And that's what's good against Skaven is having that 13th wound on your cheap stuff, being able to shoot them, being able to go over the top of them either with things that go toe-to-toe with them while being cheaper, like big Stormcast Paladins or Vexmor, or just like big giant ogre leaders and stuff like that just go over the top of them. So all of that stuff works against Skaven pretty legitimately well. The only real adjustments I would give to Skaven because there are so many answers, I think you could really justify adding 5 points to Packmasters or 10 points to Rat Ogres. I think doing both would just be way too much. But 5 points to Packmasters would mean that the battle trait can't bring Packmasters back, and so that the only really attractive thing to bring back for Skaven would be clan rats, which is kind of how it should be. When I think of the rule for there are always more, it feels like there should be more of the base troop, right? So that it's clan rats that can come back, or I could see like wanting plague monks to come back, for example. Plague monks are too expensive right now at 80 points, but at 70 points, maybe that would be pretty strong. So, tough to say there, but the 5 points on Packmasters would really change the game. Right now, the way that they add so much output to Rat Ogres, and it's hard to get them off of the board because they come back and then they can run up to the Rat Ogre later. Those Packmasters, if you couldn't bring them back, that would really change the list. The other is just if you put 10 more points on Rat Ogres, having 2 of them would actually really stress out Skaven players as far as what you can fit, because they're already pretty expensive and they require support troops to help them. That would be really difficult. Anything more than that, I think really kneecaps Skaven and wouldn't be very pleasant experience, and would just like kind of ruin what's fun about them. So I really hope we don't see too much. I also just want to note the artist here, Darken. This is not a normal Warhammer community art piece that I put on this screen, so I just want to always credit the artist when I do that, even though GW never does. Slaanesh and the Vexmor homes is kind of a thing I've been talking about as far as like how chaos kind of functions. A lot of people will just put Thrightful Discord in any random chaos list, and that doesn't really work so well. But when you have the chaos factions that actually synergize with Vexmor by having native speed but just needing that kind of efficient holding piece, then you have a real formula that can be really good. So Slaanesh Demons, Slaanesh Sybarites are both really good with Vexmor for different reasons. Beasts of Chaos are really good with them. Spire Tyrants, Khorne, Tzeentch are all 3 of those are really good with Vexmor, but to a lesser extent. But there's kind of a whole ecosystem of these factions that are really good with Vexmor and that are helped by Vexmor, and where Vexmor really like gives them a completely different look to them. And I think that's really cool because it gives a really good use for some historically kind of crappy fighters that haven't been good, especially like Tzeentch is totally transformed by Vexmor. Tzeentch Mortals, Tzeentch Arcanites is totally transformed by having Vexmor, and they've always been terrible in 2nd edition, but now they're kind of playable, which is really cool. So, the Varengard synergizes with Vexmor really well, and that has always been good. But other than that, most of the things that are good with it have just like not been good in 2nd edition, and so it's so sweet to see. And so I think that that's really good that Chaos has this option. Yes, Vexmor is a little too undercosted. I think Vexmor should be more in line with Annihilator Primes, because that's essentially what he is on the board. And the Annihilator Primes are, 190 to 230, really, in terms of what you're paying for what you're getting. So if we just increase the attack blessing from 25 to 30 to 30/45, we would totally fix, I think, like anything that's out of bounds with Chaos would just be fixed by just tweaking only Divine Blessings, just the attack blessing. Because if Vexmor costs 15 more points from 180 to 195, all of a sudden he's right in line with all those Stormcast heroes that he is equivalent to, and that would still be completely fair, and it wouldn't ruin most of these lists. I think most of them would still be playable, but they wouldn't be nearly as good because they'd be kind of searching for something to cut to fit those extra 15 points in. But he would still do his job, and he'd still be great, which would be awesome, because honestly, Chaos is kind of in a House of Cards situation. Like, they need these allies like the FOMO Crusher or Vexmor, because 90% of the Chaos factions, none of their heroes do anything that's any good at all. So that's something that I think does need to be adjusted. If you are going to nerf the hell out of Vexmor, like more than just tweaking the attack blessing, I think you need to buff at least 2 heroes from each of these factions in order to make up for it, because man, there are some bad Chaos heroes out there. I didn't mention answers to all of the kind of the good Chaos Vexmor things. Most of the time when you see Vexmor in a random Chaos list, it's honestly just not that good. You just kind of play the game against it and just know that You don't want to be within 5 inches of Vexmor, but if Vexmor has to spend dice to get to you with the 8-inch threat range, that's fine. You shouldn't worry about that. So if you just like avoid having really important pieces within 5 of Vexmor, but you can still have chaff within 5 of them, especially like 12 wound, or just the 11th wound is just so good against Vexmor that you can kind of afford to have anything with more than 10 wounds that isn't just like a really important piece. Just even within that 5-inch bubble, and you're usually fine. One way that you can really exploit certain Vexmor lists is they usually have a mediocre leader. Unless they're Slanesh demons, they usually have kind of a mediocre leader, and so you can usually exploit that by having like a matchup you can win in that situation that they're kind of just spending too many points on, things like that. Against Slanesh demons, of course, they can just have Vexmor as their leader so that they don't have to have a crappy leader, but then they have to play a bunch of demonettes, and demonettes are not good, and you can just mow demonettes off the board really quickly. So there's kind of a lot you can do against these warbands, and maybe not something that you really need to worry about just specifically countering them. So the next archetype that's really good, that's worth talking about, is something I've come to describe as Destruction Truck Rally. You can make this in Cruel Boys, you can make this in Ogre Maw Tribes, you can kind of make it in Gloomspite Gits and in Cruel Boys Monster Killers too, if we're being honest. But I think Ogres and Cruel Boys are the two best. I think it's kind of difficult for me to figure out which is the absolute best when sort of built to be competitive, but both are very good, and you see both succeeding quite a bit. They have kind of a combination of two experiences that players love. One is like that Timmy experience of just going like rah and just bringing the most beef at your opponent. Both Ogres and Cruel Boys get to do that. Cruel Boys, of course, with the ally mechanic. It's usually not a Cruel Boy who is bringing the beef there, but they just synergize so well with allies that it's easy for them to do. And then they have these, like, I call it orbital ability wizard mechanics, where their little weirdos support pieces just have better abilities than the support pieces of every other Grand Alliance. There's things like Shank in Cruel Boys. There's lots of different little abilities that you can get in Destruction that are really, really good, that are just like your sources of them are incredibly undercosted. And so you get to kind of do the big brain thing and the smooth brain thing at the same time with these Destruction Truck Rally lists, which is maybe too good, if we're being honest. But it's really fun, and a lot of people love it, and it makes it so that you can play them in a bunch of different ways. And so like two very similar lists played by different people might express themselves on the board in completely different ways, and both would be pretty good, which is kind of cool. I also love how casual versions of both factions are really fun and really cool. You can do a lot of weird stuff with Cruel Boys by like having a whole bunch of gut rippers, stuff like that. You can have a ton of fun with Ogres when you have things other than just the undercosted leaders. Like, for example, Club Gluttons are really cool, and they're pretty solid, but they're not broken like all the leaders are, or like the Noblars are. And so you can have them in your list and have a ton of fun, and like you don't have room for a lot of fighters, so you have to be really creative with what you've got, but like you can really hit hard, which is cool. Yeah, they're just like really lovable and really cool. There's a lot to like with Destruction Truck Rally. What answers you need for them really depends on the shape of the list. They can really, even a couple pretty small differences can really change what the list is. So for example, ways to counter a Cruel Boys list with a Bolt Boy boss are really different than ways to counter a Cruel Boys list that is headed up by a Manoctocunin, you know? But a lot of the time, and something that I've found playing against them that can really work to their disadvantage, is the kind of activation dance-off where they need their big guys to either go last or near last and like be able to get maximum value every round. So for example, if their big guys don't get to either hit something or get to a point where they're threatening to hit something soft next round, um, they can end up kind of falling behind and having a tough time closing the gap because they usually have fewer models than you. And so that can be a really difficult spot to be when you're playing as Destruction Truck Rally. Like if you have like a bad roll in round 1 or 2, or like you just don't have the ability to actually hit anything in round 1. That can be a situation that you can have a tough time coming back from. And so that's a thing where when you're playing against them, you can use that to your advantage. You can have more models than them and force their big things to go kind of in what to you is the middle of a round, but to them is the end of the round. You can, if you have a faction that's really good at hunting grots and noblars and things like that, like if you're really good at doing 6 damage from range, you can sort of put their utility options kind of in a box, and you can really constrain their resources that way. So there's a lot you can do against Destruction Truck Rally, even though they're really, really good. And so again, because of that, I would want to be really light touch about fixing them. I think the same thing that fixes chaos really fixes destruction here too, which is just that the attack blessing is too strong. And that is a thing that is kind of a theme when you look at really good lists, is a lot of them have an attack blessing because the attack blessing is just too good. So it really needs to go from 25 to 30, which is 25 for 22 wound models and less, and 30 for bigger models. It really needs to go from that to 30 and 45. Almost every single fighter that's a problem, if it took a 15-point nerf, it would be less of a problem. And so I think that would be really important. Some of these fighters, like, for example, Gut Lords at 15 more points would still be pretty decent, but it's a lot harder to fit some stuff in your lists at that point. So that can be really good, right? And then it becomes actually kind of tempting to downgrade all the way down to, say, like a Clawback instead of dealing with all the points that you pay for a Gut Lord, something like that. The one issue, though, the chaff is way too strong for what it's supposed to be doing in Destruction Truck Rally. The amount of points that they pay for the abilities they have and for the hit points they have is just kind of silly. Like Bushwhacker is just silly, right? And so this Underworlds chaff, I have a lot of problems with the way Underworlds has been pointed generally, but there's really only 4 that are actually a real issue, and Herc's not even that big an issue, but just Shank, Herc, Bushwhacker, Lugget, and Thwack, those all need to come up in points. They are just too cheap. So it's just like weird that little goblins are the best chaff in the game right now. It's just odd. Luckily you can't spam them, but they're still a problem, and they still give a lot of value over the course of a game. So those need to go up 5 to 10 points each, depending on the chaff. Like Herc should only go up 5. Putting Herc at 85 would be ridiculous. But things like Shank and Bushwhacker are pretty criminally undercosted at the moment. Like Bushwhacker should be 50. It's crazy that it's 40. So little changes, though, to Destruction Truck Rally. I think it would be really a shame if all of a sudden we saw like every ogre leader going up 20 points, or, you know, if Gut Rippers went up for some reason. Like, I think that would be terrible. So I really hope that we get a really small change here when we do eventually get a change, because I think that these lists are pretty cool. Guerrilla Gunlines. This was the hardest section to write or think about, because this is my least favorite playstyle among all of the really good playstyles that are in Warcry right now. But at the end of the day, what I have to give credit to is the fact that it is completely unique, and it is incredibly flavorful. Like both Wildercore and Huanchi, Hunters of Huanchi, which are the 2 factions that are the best at this playstyle. Like K-Knight Shadowstalkers can do it too, but not nearly as powerfully. Both Wildercore and Hunters of Huanchi, like, it makes sense. They should be strike and fading and just like shooting you from the bushes and kind of hiding into the terrain. And it works so well, right? It all works because they have this reaction where they can disengage for free, or not for free, they have to use a reaction to do it, but they can disengage and actually interrupt your attack. So if you are trying to get some value by ending a round in combat with one of them, hoping that that's going to help you, it's not going to help you, because they can usually they'll have more models than you. They can make sure that whatever's in combat goes last, and then you are just going to have a tough time if you aren't one-shotting them. The thing, and I almost want to put like the answers to them under things that make it cool that they're good, because one of the things that I think is great about them is that they single-handedly make speed really good in this game, because you either need to outgun them, which is really difficult, or you have to run them down. But if you're just kind of trundling around doing fun, cute things, that's just not an option. Like, for example, I'm going to talk about Dispossessed next. Dispossessed, it's a nightmare trying to play Dispossessed into these factions, because like you can't just kind of trundle around being tough, right? So there's a whole bunch of factions that want to do that are just going to really struggle against Gunlines. Like a lot of Stormcast factions are going to really struggle against these types of shooting lists. So there's a lot of factions in the game that are like really fast and don't have a lot to do with their speed, and it can be really difficult to solve the puzzle. But luckily, all those factions have a real option with just running down these guys and being really good against them. It also kind of changes, if you're worried you might have to face one of these factions, it might change what allies you bring in. Like, for example, something like a Slangor Fiendblood or like a Clawback all of a sudden becomes a lot more attractive if you think that you might be playing against something like this, which is really cool, and I think that that's a good thing. As far as adjustments to them, I think it's kind of complicated to figure out how, because are X-Bows too cheap? Are Huanchi's Claws too cheap? I would say yes, but if you pick up the points on them too much, then you just make the faction not even able to do its thing. That wouldn't hurt for Wildercore so much, because they have alternate builds. They have the Doggy build, they have the Arbalester build, they have a lot of other things that they can do that are kind of cool. Hunters of Huanchi, I don't know that the Pterodon build is something that anybody's really excited about. Maybe it is, I don't know. Let me know if you're a Hunters of Huanchi build, if you like playing your Pterodons in casual play. For people who don't know, like if you're not spamming Huanchi's Claws, you can still do cool stuff with your little like horn blower, bombing little birds onto people. You get to play Angry Birds, but I've never seen someone try this in a competitive tournament, so I don't know if it's just like luck of the draw because Hunters of Huanchi aren't that popular, or if it's because it's really bad. So let me know in the comments if you've tried it out. But the thing about that is that even at 5 points more expensive, they would still kind of frustrate some people and be very similar to how they are now. The thing that might actually be more of an issue with them is that the strength and wound blessings for divine blessings are likely too good, not to the extent that attack blessings are clearly too good, but I still think that strength and wound blessings are a little too good. So for example, it's really easy for these lists to ally in a Slan Star Master or just strength blessing the Arbalester, or bring in a Quiet Pock. And so when they have just like one source of big range damage and then lots of little range damages to finish wounded things off, that can be a really powerful combo for these. And the one piece that they bring in really benefits from that strength blessing. The other way that they benefit is just having a single big hitting piece like a Seraphon on a little, like a Dino Rider, like a Saurus Knight, and having the strength blessing on those Saurus Knights is just really powerful for them, in a way that it's actually more powerful than it is for Seraphon. Seraphon are in this really tough spot right now where I think they kind of need a rework, where their leaders are too good as allies, but as a faction, they're not as good as they should be. I mean, they're solid, right? But you would think that they'd be amazing. And so their leaders are kind of not that great for the game, but their leaders are all better in other factions than they are in Seraphon. So I almost want like a full rework and rebalance of the faction. I think that would be really good. The other thing that's interesting is the wound blessing is likely too good in the game as well, but not by very much. A thing that both of these warbands can do, that Wildercore and Huanchi can both do, is do pinpoint wound blessings where they just wound bless a couple things, but because blessings can be flexible and put into any deployment, it actually doesn't, it's like it takes some skill, but it doesn't take that much skill to know which two crossbows or which two Huanchi claws are going to be the ones that are under pressure. And then you can just put wound blessings on the ones that are going to be kind of in front, closest to your enemy, and have the non-wound blessed ones kind of in the back. Like, you can't hide all of your crossbows and all of your claws, but you can kind of know which ones are going to be in front and which ones are going to be under the most pressure. And you can put the wound blessing on those, and then they can use, they can be more likely to use their reaction to ruin your opponent's day. And so just like 2 wound blessings is really powerful in both of these factions, and that can be something where if you made that a little more expensive, that would be just like a little tax on them that would still keep them viable but not completely ruin them, which would be really great. Dispossessed. I think Dispossessed are incredible. I know not everyone loves playing against them, and it can be really demoralizing playing against them in objective games. Not gonna lie about that, but I think Grudge Bearers is the coolest freaking thing. It creates completely unique list building. For people who don't know, Grudge Bearers is the Dispossessed reaction, where when you kill a Dispossessed fighter, they can hold a grudge. If they still had actions left, they can react to hold a grudge, and that gives a bonus action to an ally. And it's not faction locked, so it lets you bring in the coolest allies and then get the very most out of them, which is awesome. And it creates like a really unique sequencing puzzle and really unique list building. And it lets you take your favorite fighter in order and just like have it do the most, have it be the coolest it can possibly be in Dispossessed. I think that's amazing. The lore accuracy is kind of funny because like it feels right when one dwarf goes down, but it doesn't quite feel dwarfy when you're like just standing there in the most like vulnerable positions you can find, hoping that they get killed. That doesn't feel very dwarfy, but so it's not very lore accurate on the table, but it is really awesome. And there are a lot of answers to them. Like, Dispossessed really struggle to win missions that don't have objectives because, of course, Grudge Bearers is the really cool thing, but the real power in Dispossessed is Over My Dead Body, where they can just own an objective. But they can have a tough time with a lot of other types of missions because you need your Grudge Bearer combo to like really go off. And sometimes when the opponent has a lot more flexibility around spacing on the board than you do, it can be really hard to completely zone them out of good options that don't trigger Grudge Bearers. And so you can really struggle in that way. And then you also kind of suffer if they manage to kill your combo piece. You can really suffer from the fact that your troops are just really inefficient and slow at the same time. So you can't get to where you're going, and you don't do that much damage when you get there. So maybe they need a rework, maybe they don't. I think they're pretty cool. The real thing is the NPE about them is the fact that any dwarf can do the objective ability. If you just leader locked the objective ability, one, that would make ally building with them a lot more difficult because they'd be tempted to have 2 leaders. But also it would stop the whole thing where any dwarf can just steal an objective at any time. Now, if you do that, though, you really have to buff Hammerers and Longbeards. Hammerers and Longbeards are just not good enough. They're so bad. And they're supposed to be kind of the co-backbone of this faction. And if you didn't have that objective ability, I think Dispossessed would like completely fall apart. And that would be really too bad because I think that the Grudge Bearers combo playstyle is so cool. And it would really be a shame to lose that in the game. So I really hope that any kind of change to Dispossessed is more a rules-based change with buffs than it is a just like, because you could quote unquote fix Dispossessed by just like nerfing the hell out of Iron Breakers. And now Dispossessed just can't put enough bodies on the board to make any of their tricks matter. And that would be a shame because you'd just remove them from the game, and that would be terrible. And I do think that they add something really cool. I think playing against Dispossessed on non-objective missions is some of the most fun you can have in Warcry because you have to think about their combo while they have to think about, your threats. And it just creates an incredible dynamic that's super fun. So it would be really sad to me if we lost that from the game. So kind of going over all of this, I just think and I hope I was able to give this impression and let people know who haven't been playing these types of games, this whole group just creates such fun games, and they're so cool. And I think even most of them, like Dispossessed and I think Destruction Trucks, require kind of complicated answers for how to figure out like how to fix the fact that they're too good. But for the most part, these just require like really simple, tiny adjustments to be kind of in line with what's in the rest of the game. And I think people should be excited about that. The other thing that I think people should be excited about is that, and I hope I was able to kind of communicate this too, is that all of these have real weaknesses, real ways that they can get beat, even by pretty ordinary factions. And so, like, every one of these S tier forces has multiple, like, I wouldn't even just say one, like, I would say multiple A or B plus tier warbands that they're really afraid to face because all of them have real weaknesses. Anytime I look at list building right now, I can't see anything that just feels invincible. There's definitely some things that I think are really good and that I'd be happy to take to any tournament, but there isn't a single invincible thing up here right now. So you could even argue that there isn't an S tier and that this should actually just be what A tier is. I think that that's a really great place for the game to be. And I love where the kind of competitive side of the game is right now. In fact, I would say that the thing that really needs help is the casual side of the game. And I really hope that one day we see this fixed. I'm not expecting any kind of changes to the game right now. We did get 2 updates that were roughly 6 months apart, which was awesome. If Warcry does continue getting those, that's amazing. I hope that they fix the elf problem one day. Daughters of Cain, Idneth Deepkin, honestly, most of Lumineth that are kind of papered over. Some of their problems are papered over by like a couple weird profile luck things, but most of their fighters are really terrible. A lot of elfy type things, like a lot of vampires kind of smell like elves a little bit on the board, and they have the same problems that elves have. I just wish that there was a way to fix this. They've shown with some of their Underworlds warbands that they can fix this for one individual fighter. So, for example, if Sireni can be pointed to a place where she's really good, that means every other Idneth Deepkin leader should be able to be pointed to a place where it's playable, right? It just like requires a little bit of work. So, Chaos Warrior equivalents are also in a really tough place, like Blood Warriors and Painbringers and Twin Souls and Maggot Kin, the Rotbringer guys, Blight Kings, right? All of them are really struggling, and I think all of the Chaos Bespokes have a specialist troop type who's just like a fighter who's the size of a Chaos Warrior, and all of them are bad, right? And so that's another like real pain point of the game right now, where these mid-range fighters have historically struggled, and they've shown us now that Underworlds can produce like really good specialists, but they haven't shown us like a mid-range sized troop, just like a fighter who is playable, because the only way these mid-range fighters seem to be playable is if they have a good profile and a good ability, and none of these have playable abilities. They all have terrible abilities. And so I'm curious if they can make them playable, because they are, in my opinion, some of the coolest sculpts in the game. I think that the Chaos Warrior is the iconic Warhammer sculpt. Warcry started as a chaos game, and it fits the aesthetic so well. Like I think that Warcry, like, it is currently, and I think it's at its best as kind of an infantry game. And so it's too bad that one Grand Alliance's most iconic infantry, which is the Chaos Warriors and all of the God-marked Chaos Warriors, are just like completely terrible in the game. I think that that's really too bad. So I would love to see these fixed on the casual side of the game, so that the casual side of the game can be as incredible as the competitive side of the game is right now. Because I hope, if there's no other takeaway that you get from this video, you should check out some lists. Go to wartally.com, look at some of these factions, check out some lists from them, and get inspired, because I think that the games for either this top tier or even like the fat middle, if you're aiming at trying to beat this top tier, I think the games that produces are just incredibly fun at events right now. And so I hope a lot of people check that out, because I think that that side of the game is in a really great place. So hopefully you kind of build some lists with that in mind. But until you do, may all your rolls be crits.